Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
My wife and I were taking a small vacation trip last October to the Red River Gorge area in Kentucky. After a full day of hiking and grabbing some dinner, we returned to our room to get some sleep. About 3 in the morning, my wife woke me up saying she was having severe stomach pain. I, being the dutiful husband I am, got dressed and hopped in the car to run down the road to pick up some stuff to settle her stomach, only to discover that things shut down for the night around there. After consulting Google, I found a 24-hour gas station about 30 minutes away and began my drive. After locating the exit, I began to slow down. I was somewhat paranoid of hitting a deer or something, especially since I was in unfamiliar territory. As I made my exit, lo and behold, a deer ran out in front of me. As I watched it cross the road, I noticed something behind it. It was the outline of a man, but there was nothing solid to him. I could see right through him, yet still clearly see his form. Now I was wide awake, with the deer having startled me, but had no explanation about what I saw. It crossed the road and continued on after the deer. For the rest of the trip, I kept feeling like I was being watched and continued to have uneasy feelings for several days after. Anyways, that's a brief rundown of my first run-in with the Glimmer Man.
My name is Justin, and I have what has been recently coined as a Glimmer Man sighting. I've thought about this many times since it happened. I grew up in the 80s and early 90s listening to my mother's ghost and UFO sighting stories, but I never took much stock in them. So when I had the experience that I had, I didn't tell anyone, because I have never heard of another person seeing something like what I had. It was 2001 in mid-August, which I remember because my birthday had just passed a week or so before this happened. I was living with my mother in her home in the short north in Columbus, Ohio. I was watching TV in the living room around 10 p.m. The overstuffed chair I was sitting in faced the dining room, and the TV was to my left where the window was. I was alone in the house, as my mother was probably at work. She was the manager at her job and normally closed the store. I had just started to think that it was off that my mother's dogs weren't in the room with me. They followed me everywhere until my mother got home. I began to feel alarmed, like something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. The feeling intensified over the next few minutes. At some point, I felt like I wasn't alone. I glanced over at the door leading to the dining room, and I saw it, and I was struck with fear. Standing right inside the doorway was what I can only describe as a predator. Except it was human in shape and size. It couldn't have been any taller than me, and I'm only 5'7". It didn't move. It stood fixed in that position for several seconds. Then it lunged forward and crossed the room very quickly. All I could do was close my eyes and cover my face. And I felt air brush my hands and arms like something had moved quickly towards me. After what felt like several minutes, I managed to convince myself to lower my arms and open my eyes. I was alone in the room. Whatever was there was not anywhere to be seen. I sat for a few more minutes trying to calm down. Then I proceeded to the game room, which was toward the front of the house. My mother had a billiard table, dartboard, golf clubs, and a few baseball bats in there. I picked up a baseball bat and made my way through the house room by room looking for whatever it was that I saw. The only thing that I found was my mother's dogs, hiding under the computer desk upstairs in her office.
My dad and I were hunting in one area we didn't like to frequent much because my dad had a bad experience back in the 70s that he didn't like to talk about. Short version, something hunted him. He never saw what it was, but it hunted him. We were back in this area and I was about 13 or 14. We had been hunting for the whole day and we had stopped to take a break. So my dad went behind one tree and me being a girl, I went for the bush. I was sitting there with a 30-30 and I saw my dad walk around in front of me and go up onto the ridge we were hunting on. I go, oh, well, he's done, so I go and finish up and I climb up out of the bush and come up behind him. So, we're hiking back in and I'm following him, and my dad was one of those people who always had to look behind him to see who was behind him, if it was anyone he knew. I'm following him and I'm following him, or I think I'm following him, and he's not turning back and looking at me, and about a half mile, hiking behind, something just set off in my head, like, this isn't my dad. I'd hunted with the man since I was 8, so 6 years, 7 years out in the woods with him. I knew my dad pretty well. So I just stopped and said, hey, turn around. He didn't stop and turned around. Even if he had been screwing with me, he would have turned around. Whatever this was, it didn't stop. It kept walking and it walked around a spruce tree in front of me and disappeared, and I'm standing there. I cocked my gun. I'm walking behind this person. I could hear their footsteps. I could see the light hitting their body, and it just stepped around a tree and disappeared. I'm not a person that believes in things unless I see them. I've been in the woods most of my life. I'm looking dead on at where this person disappeared and something comes running at me. I can hear it but I can't see it. It was like a predator, the movie creature. I can see the light being displaced by it. It was running at me and I opened fire. That's how my dad found where I was at, because he heard the gunshots. I opened fire, but I don't know if I hit it. I've been trained never to shoot at something unless you see what you are shooting at. That's gun safety 101. Well, nothing dropped and it didn't seem like I hit anything, but my dad came running up onto the ridge. We get into an argument because he thinks I'm just randomly shooting. And I'm like, I'm not just shooting things, I was following you. We finally hash it out and I tell him, no, you walked in front of me. You walked up onto the ridge. I followed you because you were done relieving yourself and I've been hiking behind you for 20 minutes now. Someone or something walked around that tree in front of me and disappeared, and something ran at me that I couldn't see. My dad said, let's get the heck out of here. So we noped out of there. That's the area where he told me had the encounter in the 70s. He'd been hunting in that area and it was getting close to dark, and he always carried a hand cannon along with a rifle. He always carried the hand cannon in his hand because that would stop a bear. He kept hearing something behind him and he thought it was a bear, so he circled back, but never got this bear. He was almost to his pickup truck and this thing was about 30 feet behind him. This was a clear trail back then, so it hadn't grown up. He looked around and he couldn't see it. So he pulled his .44 and right when it was about 10 feet behind him, he turned around and there was nothing there. But the entire trip back he said it was just like something was just standing on his neck and he couldn't see it. I haven't gone back to that place. I even told my husband, I've been hunting since I was 8, I'm not scared of bears. I'm not scared of lynx. I'm not scared of coyotes. But you cannot pay me to go hunt back in this area. I believe that it was a shapeshifter.
This is a strange encounter I had years ago in Georgia. Mind you, I've only told my brother and wife about this encounter, and it took place 41 years ago. So here it is. It was the fall of 1978, deer season in particular. I lived near a very small town called Suches, Georgia. It only had a population at that time of around 1,000 people. It's in the southeast end of the Chattahoochee National Forest. I'm an avid hunter and I was hunting on public land in the National Forest just up the road from Suches in an area called Cooper's Creek. I had scouted out the area during the summer, so late July, early August. I knew where all of the game trails were, I knew where water was located, which happens to be a small creek known as Bryant Creek. And I knew where all of the ridges and gaps were. I've hunted in and around this area for years and was very familiar with the area. Well, when I finally located a good spot, or at least a spot I thought would give me a good chance at a large buck, I set up my lock on a tree stand in a tree about 12 feet off of the ground. I trimmed the branches to give me some shooting lanes and basically was all set for deer season. Oh, I was hunting with a 12-gauge shotgun. Rifle hunting is not allowed in the area. So fast forward to early November. I had been hunting out of my tree stand about 6 times by the time this particular hunt happened. It was late afternoon, around 4:15 p.m. I wanted to get there earlier, but work held me up. We had hired this new kid named Ryan and he was slowing me down all week. Anyway, this was a Friday. I finished up at work, jumped in my truck and headed out to my hunting spot. Now this was my normal routine for a Friday afternoon during deer season, and my wife knew that I would not be home until around 8:30 p.m. and even later if I bagged something. I parked my truck at the trailhead and started hiking into the woods to find my tree stand. The walk would take about 15 or 20 minutes. You want to walk pretty quickly but not run, you don't want to make too much noise moving through the woods, you don't want to spook any of the wildlife. As I was walking to my stand, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. I mean, it was very quiet. I didn't hear any of the normal chirping or singing birds, no insects, nothing, and only a slight breeze. I thought it was a bit strange but continued on to my dear stand. I finally arrived and climbed up and settled in. Once I was comfortable, I jacked around into the chamber, put the safety on my shotgun and began surveying the surroundings, looking for anything out of place. Sometimes deer bed down during the day and you can spot their antlers above the tall grass and underbrush. As I was doing this, I began to have this ominous feeling that someone was watching me. I don't really know how to explain it, other than I had this deep feeling, deep within me, in my core, in my gut, something wasn't right. Well, I tried to ignore it for a while, telling myself to stop being such a coward. There's nothing out here but you, some deer hopefully, some squirrels, skunks and other little critters. As time passed, the feeling only intensified. I kept looking at my watch, wondering how much time I had left until dusk. Should I leave early? I thought to myself. Of course not, a huge deer was probably only moments away. As I was sitting there arguing with myself, I caught movement to my right side in the trees. I slowly turned my head and began looking through the tree canopy, and that's when I saw it. This is the part that still gives me chills. Even writing this now freaks me out because I honestly don't know what I saw. As I was staring into the trees, I saw what looked like a large bodybuilder but completely blurry moving through the trees. I could clearly see the outline of the figure, but the rest was blurry, like I couldn't focus on it. It looked like a clear gelatinous blob but in the shape of a human, a large human. And whenever it would stop, I completely lost sight of it. It blended into its background perfectly. I just watched it for what seemed like an eternity, but in actuality it was more like 15 minutes. It moved through the trees effortlessly like a monkey or squirrel. It never really looked at me while I was watching it. Maybe it was before and that's why I got the feeling someone was watching me, I don't know. It slowly moved off and I was scared about my walk back to my truck. So, I waited for another 30 minutes. It was getting dark now and I slowly climbed out of my stand. Once I hit solid ground, I wasted no time. I sprinted all the way back to my truck. I jumped into the cab of my trusty Ford pickup truck and my lungs were on fire. That was the farthest and fastest I've run since basic training back in 1967. I just sat there in my truck and tried to regain my breath. I drove home and said nothing to my wife or anyone else for a few weeks. As time passed, I tried to convince myself that I imagined it all, that I dozed off in the stand and had some sort of dream. But I couldn't get the idea of that thing out of my head, so I broke down and told my wife over dinner one night. She just listened and said it was probably my imagination. I later told my brother, who said something similar, along the same lines. I never told anyone else and I never hunted in those same woods again. I never even went back for the tree stand. It was only like $300 and I didn't want to go back there again, not for a measly $300 bucks. I took a break from hunting for about 10 years and then started up again, but never in that area. I still wonder what I saw that day. I have no rational explanation. Later in 1988 or so I saw the Arnold movie, The Predator. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I jumped up and yelled at my wife, "That's what I saw. That looks just like it." I don't know if the writer had a similar experience as mine and that's what inspired him to make the Predator cloak the way it did in the movie, or perhaps he heard some other eyewitness account, but that's almost exactly what I saw in the woods in northern Georgia in the fall of 1978. Mind you, not the reptilian-looking beast with lasers, but the cloaked part. Like I stated previously, I thought I was alone until you did the episode on the Glimmer Man and now realize that others have seen it too. I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse. Anyway, that's my story.
I want to tell you about a series of events that have happened to me, starting in 2012 and could still currently be happening. My story is what I have recently found out could be called the Glimmer Man. I had never heard of anyone else seeing anything like I've experienced before, and I have also never seen the movie Predator. My close friend Nick is obsessed with all things supernatural, and I am obsessed with true crime, so he suggested I watch The Missing 411, The Hunted. I did, and by the end I was pretty disturbed because I had never before heard of anyone seeing something that was essentially a translucent figure like I had. It really took me back because for years I have thought that either I had a psychotic break or that I'm a medium and can see ghosts. It never occurred to me that it could be something paranormal or anything like that. I told my friend Nick that I had seen a translucent being before, but that's all the detail I could admit to him. He told me I had probably seen what's called the Glimmer Man and sent me a podcast so I could have my sanity validated. I have never told a single soul these stories. I have tried to block it out of my mind because I realized after the fact that it could be something sinister, and if it wasn't, then I couldn't tell anyone because I was sure they would think I was insane. This has really freaked me out for a lot of years now. I vowed I would never tell anyone, but after listening to the other stories, I really think I need to. I refer to this thing as a mass because that's the best way I could describe it. Physically, it was translucent and had no discernible edges, however I could tell it was made of something. If you took light, got it to refract through a prism and took a picture of it. I cut that picture into 1/4 inch squares and faced them in every single direction you can, all at random. That's what it looked like. I could see the blue, green, and red bouncing back to my eyes, but it all moved like static, so I couldn't hook onto a single section or color for long. This description is the same for every time I've seen it. The shape and size are the only thing that changed, and it was by no means smooth. Usually the upper half would be sort of distended, but in a very rough, almost rocky cliff-like shape. One last thing before I start. 2 months before the first incident, my roommate Kylie made a suicide attempt that led to her accidentally drowning in the Boys River. It was not actually her intention, but very long story short, she passed away. I say this because I thought that this Glimmer Man was her coming back as a ghost at the time. I thought she had come back to talk to me. I wanted in my mind to believe it was her. I say that to explain why I did not panic when I saw the thing on the first incident. I cannot explain why I was so calm on the second. So here it goes. October 2012, I had moved to Portland, Oregon from Boise, Idaho in the wake of my roommate's death. I was in my room alone at about 11 p.m. My room has a sliding glass door that connects straight to the backyard. I looked over towards the door in the corner of the room and I saw a strange mass that was about 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. I would estimate the depth to be 3 feet as well, and was completely translucent. I blinked because I had assumed it was my eyes playing tricks on me, but it was still there. I felt very calm. The figure was very obviously focused on me. It didn't have eyes, but it's almost as if the top part of it was leaned in a little closer than the rest, and if I moved around the room, it would turn in my direction. Immediately I think this is a ghost, it needs to tell me something. So I reached out my hand and the mass came towards me and lifted my hand, very gently and weakly, but I did not have to use the regular amount of muscle it takes to lift my own arm. It was clearly lifting my arm for me. I would describe the feeling as if you took two opposite magnets and tried to force them together, not the strength of it, but just like an invisible force that you can physically feel pushing you. It was completely even pressure where it would touch me, and it could move my hand and arm if I had it relaxed. I held out my arm and asked it to tell me who it was. The mass pushed on my arm to the left and led me through my room to a group of magazine posters on the wall. It lifted my hand up to the posters and put my hand over a picture of a band I had liked. This is a band Kylie loved as well, so I said move my hand up if yes and side to side if no, but are you Kylie? The mass moved my hand up. I got very emotional, cried immediately, but I held it together because I wanted to talk to her. I went and got a blank notebook and a pen and asked the mass to write to me what it wants to say while I held the pen. The mass would move my hand while I had it on the paper, but none of the drawings made any sense, so I asked it to move the pen instead. I was barely holding on the pen, I just had it between my fingers to keep it upright. The mass started to move the pen across the page. I realized that I couldn't be imagining things because I could literally see the pen moving by itself, even though I was still holding the bottom of it slightly. This went on for probably 2 hours. I tried to get this thing to write something legible, but nothing looked like any type of letter. It was all just strange designs and shapes. I believe I still have this journal in my parents' storage area in Idaho. I plan on finding it and sending pictures of it once I leave Alaska this fall. This is where things get really nuts. What I am going to say next is why I have never told anyone any part of this story before. If someone told me this, I would never think they were sane. My new roommate Alexa came into my room to ask me who I was talking to. All of a sudden the mass got very tiny, like the size of a mouse, and it sat in my hand. I told her I think Kylie is here talking to me and to watch this. I say please move the pen for me. The pen and my hand start to move across the paper and Alexa freaked out. She said this is insane and she doesn't know what's happening, but she said I need to stay away from her for the night. I was honestly too preoccupied to care about her reaction and we didn't get along well anyway, so I just let her go. She goes to bed and the mass gets really big, skinnier than before but probably 2 feet taller than the start. It starts pushing my hand left and leads me to the door, out to my living room and to my front door. I said no, I'm not going, and walked back to my room, but it just keeps putting this pressure on my hand to get me to go out in the living room again. I oblige because at this point, I am convinced that this is like the lost soul of my close friend and nothing she could do would be dangerous. I go outside and it leads me to my car. I must have gone back in for my keys and coat because I remember wearing a coat, but I don't remember exactly how I got it or my keys. At this point I'm in the car and I tell the mass to move my hand left or right for turns, up to stop and down for forward. The mass leads me out of my neighborhood and down at least a full mile to an area that is sort of industrial but also like an abandoned park. I don't know how to describe it totally, and this is the only time I've ever been to this location. There were several big trees surrounding this place. It was like an open sort of park behind an industrial building, so there were no lights and there were several random pieces of abandoned scrap metal, just assorted random things everywhere. I got out and it was very clear that the mass was putting pressure on me to go forward. I'm going wherever it's telling me to go. We get to this 6 feet tall and 10 feet wide metal structure that has a little ladder on the side. It wants me to go up the ladder, so I climbed it. Then it's jolting my hand forward, but forward is the ground below. It wants me to jump off the structure, which I did one time because it wasn't too high and I sat down before I jumped to lessen the impact. Then the mass puts pressure on my hand side to side, which we had agreed was no, leads me back to the ladder and signals up like it wants me to climb. At this point, I'm realizing that I don't think this is my dead friend anymore. I'm thinking something is tricking me, but I also didn't want to completely give up in case it was her. I climbed up one more time and stood at the top. The mass signaled me to jump, but I told it no. I said it's not fair because I'm alive and this could hurt me, so if you have something to tell me, you need to find another way. I climbed down from the ledge and the mass tried twice more to lead me back to the metal structure. I just couldn't be there anymore alone in the dark in a weird part of Portland. I didn't want to be arrested or killed, so I said enough, I'm going home. The mass tried to control my hand the entire ride home, even getting out of my car and walking up to my house. But keep in mind, the pressure is not that strong, so I was easily able to ignore it. I walked straight to my room and I kept feeling the pressure on my arm trying to get me to go outside. At this time, and for the whole time we were on our outing, the mass was about the size of a basketball. I tried one last time to communicate with the mass via pen and journal, but I still couldn't get anything legible, so I decided to tell it that it's time to go. I walked out back and told the mass, it's time to go. If you are Kylie, then I hope you go to heaven now, but I can't do anything further, so you need to leave. The mass went about 10 to 15 feet in the air and hovered. It was big at this point, at least 7 feet, and then I walked back inside and closed the sliding glass door. I was hoping it was gone, but I saw the mass a few more times out of the corner of my eye. I chose to ignore it and just kept repeating, you need to go away, I can't do anything for you, I'm sorry, and eventually it was gone. I didn't see it again for a long time. I never talked about it and my roommate never brought it. I had decided I must have a strange ability to talk to ghosts, but I obviously cannot tell the good from the bad. So I knew that I couldn't communicate with them if I ever saw them, for my own safety. About 6 months goes by, I moved into a new house in Portland with my brother and close friend. I drove down to Southern California for the Coachella Music Festival in April 2013. A friend and I drove down for the weekend and then had to drive all the way back up the I-5 back to Oregon, but he had to drive because I dropped my driver's license on the first day of Coachella, so I had no ID. As soon as we crossed over the Oregon border, we stopped in a town with a DMV so I could get a replacement temporary ID and share the driving. I had to fix my makeup before I went to get my picture taken and all that, so we stopped into a grocery store to use the bathroom. I believe it was a Safeway. As soon as I got into the bathroom, I saw it, a vibrating translucent static mass just standing in the corner very ominously. I looked straight at it and assumed it was a ghost, and I thought it was probably lost if it's just sitting here in this bathroom. I can't explain why I did this. I'm not actually a brave person whatsoever, but at the time I just felt overwhelmingly calm. I can't express to you how unlike myself that is for me to do. I proceeded to fix all of my makeup in the mirror, then I turned around and looked at the mask that was still very obviously there, and I said, you look lost. You can come with me if you want. My thought process at the time was that maybe I'll get another chance to help some lost soul or something. I had blocked out most of my first experience and wasn't immediately remembering how terrifying it was. I did not touch the mask this time, but I could feel it following me in the same way you can feel something watching you. I walked out of the store into the car where my car buddy was. He never mentioned anything about the mask being in the car, which could be because he slept almost the whole rest of the way, but I could see it in the rear view mirror from time to time. This mask never changed size or shape. It was always about 4 feet tall and 2 to 3 feet wide, sort of rectangular but very rounded. As we drove, I started to remember how bad of an idea this could be and realized I didn't want to do it anymore and that I didn't have anything left to say to the mess. When we got back to Portland, the mass followed me inside my house and stayed in my room for the next 2 days. I ignored it almost the whole time and I started to feel guilty about that because I had told it to come with me initially. The night before the last time I saw it, I told it I'm sorry, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't think I can help you, you should leave so you can find someone who can. The mass stayed in the corner all night and then the next day it was gone forever. Since that time, there have been multiple occasions where I have seen something like the mass out of the corner of my eye, but I have always avoided looking directly at it. After a few years of avoiding looking, I completely stopped seeing them. I live in Seward, Alaska now. I have a house in the forest on 5 acres with a lot of tall trees. I watched The Hunted with a friend and afterwards I told him this really freaks me out because I have seen that before, referring to the saran wrap-like thing the woman in the movie had described. He told me immediately that's what I've been looking through my windows. He told me he has seen these things multiple times and multiple at a time. He is a hunter and he will see them almost every time he goes on hunts alone, but almost exclusively out of the corner of his eye. Very rarely can he get a full front view of them. He says they're following alongside him, and they don't have any trouble getting over obstacles like trees or rocks. He knows about Bigfoot and Skinwalker Ranch, but that is literally the extent of anything he knows about this sort of thing. I know he could not have made this up and he said it to me before I told him any details from my experiences. Even now, he knows far less than what I've written here. One last thing, I have seen these so many times at my house in Seward, Alaska, and I live 4 miles from a location where Michael LeMaitre vanished on Mount Marathon in 2012 during the annual 4th of July race up the mountain. Our town swells to over 10,000 people during this race, so there were plenty of people to search or to have seen something, but no trace of him was ever found after numerous searches of the area. The animals all left the area because of all the tourists, and there was no evidence of an attack, and this mountain is so close to downtown it's impossible he could have been lost. Makes me wonder if there is a connection.
I had an experience last night, Sunday, May 17th, that I thought you two would love to hear about. Now a little background on me. I'm 36 years old and a military police veteran of 10 years. I've had some weird things happen to me in my life that I can explain and others I still can't until this day. I have a healthy skepticism of the paranormal, which is why these experiences bother me so much. I don't worry myself about how people may perceive me when I tell others some of my stories, because after being a cop for 10 years you know what you see and the facts are the facts. I have asked before, if you had the chance to see any kind of creature, which would it be? Well, last night I'm pretty sure I saw the damn Glimmer man. Now any other night my girlfriend and I would have gone to bed at the same time, but I end up staying up later due to having to get my daughter from work late. I got home and stayed up until around 1 a.m. My girlfriend went to bed maybe an hour earlier. Went through my usual routine, checked the doors and windows to make sure they were locked and then laid down. I usually toss and turn throughout the night, fully waking up for a few minutes before going back to sleep. I sleep on the end of the bed furthest away from the bedroom door. I have blackout curtains over my window so my corner of the room is very dark. Our neighbor leaves her porch lights on so some light pours in through our window. On my girlfriend's side she prefers to have a little light shine through. On her bedside table she plugs in her phone so you can see the light periodically shine when a notification comes in. As I turned over to face her side of the room, that's when I saw it. Now this wasn't let me focus on whatever this is. It was an instant, what the hell is that? Now, I don't care who you are or what you've done in your life or how bad you think you are. When you're in a vulnerable state and face to face with something that shouldn't exist, everything goes out the window. I've been in convoys, high-risk traffic stops, and patrols in Iraq, but no fear compared to this. It had to be at least 6 or 7 feet tall maybe, and wide. I say that because as my girlfriend's phone notification light illuminated the corner next to the head of the bed, I could see its right-hand shoulder, arm, and a little bit of its side. From what I could see, especially in the shoulder area, it looks like it had on some kind of, I know this sounds silly, but small shoulder pads. Nothing big like football pads, but imagine baseball knee pads on your shoulder, like that. When the light hit it, it did have that predator look to it with slight glimpses of reds, blues, and purples maybe. Just like it was somehow bending light. I couldn't see the legs, chest, or face area cause I guess the light wasn't strong enough to reach it. What was even more scary is that it was moving while standing next to my girlfriend like it was touching her in some way. It would seemingly reach over to her nightstand and grab things and then turn back to her, doing all of this pretty fast. Maybe there was something else there that I couldn't see. Now that I think about it, imagine laying on a gurney and being operated on. That's what it looked like, it being the doctor. I laid there completely frozen. Jumping up crossed my mind, then I quickly decided not to. If this is real, I don't know the risks. Is this thing capable of reacting? Would I upset it and something more severe could happen? From what I could see, my girlfriend was sound asleep. While all this was happening, I was still in the same position I was in when I rolled over and saw this thing. My entire body was hot and I could feel myself starting to sweat. Now I work out on the regular and have a pistol on my nightstand and a gun safe full of weapons in my closet no more than 10 feet away. I'm not afraid to say, as I laid there watching this thing opening and closing my eyes to make sure I wasn't seeing things that weren't there. A tear ran down my face, and it was because of pure fear. The whole full sighting lasted about 2 minutes. From there I closed my eyes and began to say the Lord's Prayer over and over again until I couldn't see it and got the courage to roll over. Needless to say, I slept like shit last night. I probably won't mention this to my girlfriend. It wouldn't help the situation any, and I feel like the less she knows the better. Either this thing is real or all of us that have seen it or something like it are going insane. Hell, they said that about UFOs and look what happened. Apparently they're out there too.
In early March of 2020, I was sitting upright in my upstairs master bedroom feeding my 3-month-old daughter a bottle. The TV was off, it was dark outside, and approximately 6:30 p.m. For purposes of the story, the layout of the room is important. From my seated position, to my immediate right was my bathroom. Then a little up from the bathroom was a dresser with a mirror on it, and then up from that was an open door to the hallway. The bathroom light was on, my bedside table light was on, and I could see a little bit into the hallway. Anyway, I'm feeding my daughter and quietly enjoying a moment to myself while my wife and 3-year-old are downstairs watching TV. As I'm feeding her, I catch movement in the hallway outside of the bedroom. I saw it out of the corner of my eye and then pivoted my face to look at the movement. What I saw, I can't really explain, but the feeling in my chest was an immediate rush of anxiety. I saw a darkened but transparent torso shape with no legs and no head, and it was moving toward or into the bedroom. It looked like a shadow through a screen door. It didn't float, but shuffled as if walking, and the torso would have been about my height, around 5 feet 10. The shadow or glimmer crossed into the bedroom, and then in front of the mirror, but it cast no shadow and did not reflect in the mirror. I watched it as it crossed into the light of the bathroom and then disappeared. My daughter's eyes flashed open, which was strange because she was sleep eating, and I noped the hell right out of the room as fast as I could. If I hadn't been holding her, I would have left her on the bed. The being was not a shadow. I repeat, not a shadow. No cars passed in front of the house, and my other child and wife were below me in the TV room. It could not have been something moving in front of the house because the shape or shadow would have changed as it crossed the dividing wall between hallway and bedroom. I grabbed my baseball bat and went back through every room in the house and found nothing. Like, my Louisville Slugger would have been able to do anything about it, but I had to try. I'm not a believer of aliens, but I'm not against the idea of other things beyond my scope of understanding being out in the world. What the hell was that?
I was 13 years old in Lake Orion, Michigan, visiting my mom's friends and their kids for the 4th of July weekend. I and a friend and their kids were roaming around the city area late at night. We ended up walking down some residential roads. It was really quiet and dead out, probably around 2 a.m., with no cars driving around. Just that really calm, peaceful time at night when hooligans can run wild. Some of the kids wanted to ding-dong ditch some houses, and I was kind of a straight-edged kid, so I went along with it even though it made me nervous. We had ding-dong ditched probably 5 houses at that point, and the kids started pressuring me to do it. That it was my turn, don't be such a P***SSY type of stuff. So, they directed me to ring the doorbell of the house we were standing in front of. It was a smaller white house, square-shaped, with some metal fencing around the back for the owner's dogs. I walked up and there was no doorbell, so I walked back. They told me to just knock then. So, as someone who didn't want to kill the fun, I went back and knocked to find they had already taken off running. I ran after them, and I don't know if I believed what they were saying, but even my friends said they saw it. Apparently, there was a face in the window the first time I went up, and the house is notoriously haunted. I was a little spooked, and out of breath. We must have run half a mile. I looked behind me to see if there was anything scary following us, and I saw this figure that I have always described as looking made out of water. A humanoid figure is translucent, which makes the background behind them wavy and has a defined outline. I figured my mind was playing tricks on me and just kept walking, joking around with the others, looking back every so often. It was following us, and I could see it under the street lamps occasionally. The leader kid, who wanted to ding-dong ditch houses, looked to see what I was looking at and exclaimed to his friend, "Do you see that?" and took off running. My friend looked back and took off running, and I was again left running after them. We ran all the way back to his house, probably 3 miles. No sign of it behind us anymore, but I have never been so shaken or scared in my entire life. I was inconsolable. I was scared for a while. I would see it again and find out it had been following me the entire time. It's been over 10 years now, and I've never seen anything like that again, and I've never been able to find anything like it searching for hours on the internet, until recently.
Nobody's going to believe me when I say this, but I want to say a juvenile Sasquatch when I was young. My mom used to leave us at the Green River in Kentucky to go fishing on the weekends with my little brothers. We would go camping and my mom would drive up north for the weekend. This is back when we didn't have cell phones or anything. My mom always told us never to go past the tree line because there are homeless people. We always believed that because we lived in the city and had moved to the country. And they always talk about how the homeless people in the tree lines are always yelling and banging on trees. So we were always scared of them. We're down there fishing and we run out of bait. I want to say the last day of being there, we were leaving later in the afternoon. I had to go in the tree line. I wanted to flip rocks, everything I could find, worms or grubs, because the carp were everywhere. You could see them and we wanted to get some worms to have a better chance of catching them. So, I told my brothers and stayed there, I'm going to go look for bait. Well, I didn't expect to experience what I experienced. I was walking with my head down looking for something to flip over. Then I saw feet. Like human feet. Right in front of my feet I see toenails that look like wood. Okay, I start to look up and see hair on the body, but there's also parts of the body that don't have hair. As I looked at this creature, it's not even 10 feet from me. It's like we both ran into each other by accident and were both startled. I looked in his eyes and his eyes were like galaxies. Colored brown and green, also reddish, blackish, just huge eyes. You don't know what you're looking at when you see these colors or this creature. When this creature backs up into the sunlight, maybe 3 steps backwards, and when the sunshine hits its fur, it's kind of invisible. Seriously. The way the sun reflected its fur in front of my eyes. As I'm looking at this creature in the shade, stepping back 3 times, it disappeared in front of my eyes. Let me remind you, this is not even 20 feet after we first encountered each other. I can see why people don't see these things. Sometimes we don't know what we're looking for. Our eyes are registering something else. I get the chills when I think about this. I was scared to death and I thought it was a homeless man. I didn't know what I was looking at. I never knew of Bigfoot. My mother talked about wood boogers because she grew up in the country. I was confused. I was freaked out. I couldn't even move. I wanted to go for my brothers. I tell you, as soon as I blink my eyes, I lose vision of it right in front of me. Even though I knew where it was. 20 years later, I'm obsessed with Bigfoot and I never got to tell my story. I'm so scared of the outcome if I go camping and experience something way worse because I said something. I know that there are people who are going to believe me. And for the ones that don't, I completely understand why if I could give you my eyeballs that day you would see for yourself. This thing cloaked itself like the predator in the film, right in front of me. But not fully cloaked. If I hadn't walked into this creature, I would probably have never seen it in the sun. So, what I'm saying is if we didn't bump into each other and he was just standing in that sunlight, I would have never even noticed it. That's how they camouflage themselves. Like the sun reflects off their fur. What I'm trying to say is, since we bumped into each other, I had my eyes on him as he backed up and as the sun made him turn kind of invisible. I know it's hard to explain and I'm sick of feeling like I'm crazy. I don't want attention. I don't want to go on a podcast. But what I experienced messed with me hard growing up. My whole life I thought that I was a homeless person, until about 1.5 years ago, I got interested in Bigfoot and then I started listening when people were saying they had the same type of encounter. But I actually saw this creature back up into the sun and disappear. This creature did not stink or anything. That's why I thought it was just a homeless man at that time. Remind you, I'm like 10 years old at the time. Maybe I was worried about my little brothers at first, and then the thought of my mother telling me not to go in that tree line. So I felt like I was invading their space. I finally told my story now. I feel like I got this big rock lifted off my chest. I have seen this thing in my sleep ever since I was a little boy. Thank you for your time. Until this day, I know exactly where I was at and I know exactly where I was standing. Even though I sometimes question my sanity on the situation, I thought about going back several times. But I don't need to because I know what I saw. I can't tell you if they're harmless or if they're dangerous, but the creature I saw was trying to get away from me. I hope this story helps somebody that is struggling with their encounter. It's okay. It doesn't matter if people don't believe you. There are people that will.
This happened in 2007. I don't remember the exact date. I was an international student from Indonesia, studying interior design at Art Institute College, located on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles, now moved to North Hollywood. It was a stressful college life for me. I had a hard time catching up with the workload of assignments. I missed many assignment deadlines. I felt so stressed that I didn't go to class if I didn't have anything good to show and present during the class. While I was studying there, I used to live in a newly built, 2-story townhouse in Arcadia, near the Santa Anita shopping mall and the horse racetrack. My older sister used to live in the same house, but in early January 2007 she moved out of the country after she finished her studies. So I was alone. When I was very young, like 5 years old, I had many nightmares and was able to see bad things inside and around my childhood house. Almost every night I woke my parents and siblings up with my screams. Thank goodness the regular nightmares stopped when I was about 12 years old. The most scary thing I saw is a pair of glowing red eyes attached to a large black, ape-like body. It was above me while I was laying on the bed sleeping. The red eyes were less than a foot distance away from my face. I felt so terrified and paralyzed, I let out a faint shriek when I woke up and saw that thing staring at me. I pulled up my blanket and covered my face while that thing was still staring. Later I learned that Indonesian people call it genderuwo. Right back to the topic. One late afternoon or early evening, after all day staying inside my bedroom watching TV and basically doing nothing productive, I wanted to go to the kitchen downstairs and make something for dinner. When I opened my bedroom door, immediately I saw a translucent humanoid sitting on the floor with its legs crossed and facing the opposite direction to my bedroom's door. When it noticed me, it started to get up from the floor and turn its body to face me. It was rather skinny with long arms and clearly defined outline, just like the cloaking alien in the Predator movie, only smoother I think, about maybe 5 feet tall. I remember instantly feeling a very negative, malicious energy from that thing. I then quickly closed the door and locked it. I was thinking of hiding under my bed, but it didn't have ample space underneath it. I decided to just wait inside my bedroom until the following day around noon. I thought it was an evil spirit and I wished the full sunlight would make it disappear. The next day it was gone and I never saw such a thing again. The recent movie titled The Invisible Man, 2020, reminded me of my encounter with that thing. I've done some research about it online and found out that it lives in the forest or sparsely human-populated places. Some say it's a cloaking Bigfoot, but I think it's something different. A Bigfoot would have a thick, tall physique, wouldn't it? This thing was 5 feet tall and slender. And based on what I saw from its outline, I think it maybe had short hair? Like shoulder length maybe? The house I used to live in Arcadia is also very close to the Angeles National Forest. So maybe it came down from the forest area. I don't know.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.